From the studios of Farm Journal Broadcast, this is U.S. Farm Report.
Welcome to U.S. Farm Report this weekend. I'm Tyne Morgan, and here's what's in store over the next 60 minutes. From heartbreak to hope, the devastation caused by the Texas wildfires continues to grow.
We're all in the ranching business and sometimes give a hard time to farmers, but farming saved our lives here. The disc and the wheat field, I don't think these typical immediate.
But from the ashes came heartfelt donations from ranchers and farmers hundreds of miles away.
We kept loading trucks and kept sending them out there.
The winter that wasn't. That's the reality for those in the northern plains.
You know, there was guys putting fertilizer down in southeast North Dakota here a week ago. So it does look like right now this could be one of the first years in many years that we could be in the field in April.
How farmers in North Dakota are weathering 2024. And Caitlin Clark may be making headlines today, but this female athlete was perhaps the greatest female athlete of all time.
U.S. Farm Report, presented by Pioneer. What's next happens when experience meets expertise. Pioneer. What's next happens here.
Well, U.S. corn prices really needed some help this week in the form of a new supply and demand report from USDA. Many analysts really watching what USDA was going to do to Brazil. USDA cutting Brazil's soybean production numbers by 1 million metric tons. That was less than the trade expected. USDA didn't make any cuts to Brazil's corn. The agency also leaving Argentina's soybean production estimate unchanged, but raised Argentina's corn estimate by 1 million metric tons. USDA making no changes to the U.S. ending stocks figures except for wheat. USDA raising ending stocks for wheat due to lower exports. USDA did lower the global ending stocks estimate for corn, soybeans, and wheat. We'll get reaction coming up in our marketing roundtable. Well, another big story we're watching this weekend, recovery efforts following the wildfires in the Texas Panhandle. It will likely be a couple of weeks before all the damage can be tallied up, but officials in Texas say the cost of potentially the largest wildfire in not just Texas, but U.S. history will be massive. However, the cattle death losses should not have an impact on the cattle market or beef prices for consumers. Nearly 1.5 million acres of land in Texas has now been burned up by the wildfires. Early cost estimates are in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The pictures tell the story of the losses, with over 500 barns and houses and 7 grain and seed dealers destroyed. Plus, there's 120 miles of power lines down, lost pasture, and mounting livestock deaths.
We've got, 3,000 or 4,000 miles of fence. That's my estimate. That's not factual, but I'm pretty sure I'm pretty close. A mile of fence is $10,000. So you can figure that up. Just the loss in fences is astronomical. Those numbers will continue to grow, unfortunately.
Miller says water, hay, and feed are the most immediate need, with drop-off points throughout the state. And farmers and ranchers from across the country are answering that call for help. We'll have that story coming up later in the show. Bayer is putting off plans to possibly break the company apart for now. Reuters reporting Bayer will hold off on spinning off parts of the company for up to 3 years. CEO Bill Anderson on a media call saying, quote, "Our answer is not now, and this shouldn't be misunderstood as never," end quote. He called separation costs and capital gains taxes as reasons to delay. Last year, Anderson had said the company was looking at potentially spinning off the ag sciences business, but it's reported the company will now focus on issues such as debt and litigation. Well, will we see interest rate cuts this year? The Federal Reserve Chairman providing an update this week. Chair Jerome Powell reinforcing his belief before a House committee that the Fed will cut its key interest rate this year, but that it first wants to see more evidence that inflation is falling sustainably back to its 2% target.
The economy has made considerable progress toward these objectives over the past year. While inflation remains above the FOMC's objective of 2%, it has eased substantially, and the slowing in inflation has occurred without a significant increase in unemployment. As labor market tightness has eased and progress on inflation has continued, the risks to achieving our employment and inflation goals have been moving into better balance.
Powell did not express concern about the government's latest inflation data, which showed some uptick in prices in January. And take a look at this. Ag economists are growing more pessimistic about interest rate cuts this year. In the latest Ag Economist Monthly Monitor, 44% said they are becoming more pessimistic about cuts in 2024. 37% responded they are growing more optimistic. And if rate cuts do happen this year, more than 40% of ag economists surveyed think it will be by no more than 1%. Just under 40% expect to see no change in 2024. Some signs of improvement in farmer sentiment, according to the latest Ag Economy Barometer from Purdue University and the CME Group. The monthly survey of farmers rising in February to a reading of 111. That's 5 points higher than in January, but still 14 points below where it was this time last year. The rise driven mainly due to producers being somewhat more optimistic about the future.
Once again, in this month's survey, we asked producers what their biggest concerns are for their farming operation in the upcoming year. And the top concern remains higher input costs, chosen by 34% of this month's respondents. But 28% of the respondents this month chose lower crop and/or livestock prices. That's up from 18% who chose that a year ago.
Something to note, the interest in leasing farmland for solar energy. The February survey asking farmers where they've discussed a solar energy project with a company in the last 6 months and for how much money. Take a look at the latest results there in brown, with 10% saying they had been approached in the last 6 months, and more than half, 56%, said they were offered a lease rate of $1,000 per acre or more. They're calling it Miracle March in California, a massive snowstorm made for brutal conditions, but it brought essential relief for farmers. We'll talk about it next.
U.S. Farm Report weather is brought to you by H&S Manufacturing. Poly sides, floor, and a rear monoblock gearbox on vertical beater models are just some of the great features of the H&S Hydra Push 425 and 550 bushel model manure spreaders. Find out more about the Hydra Push at the H&S website.
An unbelievable comeback just hit California. A massive winter storm took California's snowpack from just 28% on January 1st to now 104% of normal. That snowpack is a welcome sight for farmers, as it means California will be drought-free again this summer for a second year in a row. It's also good news for irrigation. Matt Engelbrecht joining us now with weather. Impressive? I mean, I guess that's one way to describe the winter storm that blasted California, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely, Tyne. Impressive is one way. The other way is extreme. You remember that's kind of what we are dancing between, the extremes regarding California. You don't have to go back far. And remember the extreme drought in portions of California. Now we're on the other end of the spectrum with that snowpack and the available water in and across the state. I'm talking about the higher terrain and that snowpack. The temperature outlook between the 12th and the 16th is something that we've seen before. What I'm starting to see in the jet stream, as we'll see in just a second, you got a pocket of some warm air or a ridge developing over 2/3 of the United States, and possibly a cutoff low in the jet stream back over here towards the Four Corners. That's why you see the warmth on the west coast come up and over, and then once again spread across the United States with the above normal temperatures for a good portion of the United States. Again, that's the 12th through the 16th. If we flip it over and look at the precipitation outlook, a couple of things that could stand out. Where that cutoff low develops, there's a higher chance of some rainfall, certainly needed in the panhandle of Texas as you go through this week. And then by March 16th, you got another contour, wetter than normal conditions back here towards parts of the southeast. This is all Gulf Coast moisture working to the east, but not necessarily up to the northeast, mainly because of that ridge of high pressure is going to kind of suppress any kind of surface systems, mainly down here to the south. So that's why you get normal, if not a little bit wetter than average conditions back into the plains and the Dakotas. Drier during that period off on the west coast. So let's go look at it. Your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, it's all about this upper level trough in the jet stream that's going to be digging across the United States and exiting to the northeast. Interesting thing about it is we're going to be sandwiched between two troughs in the jet stream, one there and one here. The difference between this week and last week with what we're dealing regarding the trough, this ridge of high pressure is expected to strengthen, meaning if anything tries to dig in and across the United States, spread colder air or rain, it actually has to go up and over the ridge. So one thing that we're going to be looking at very closely is where the jet stream or how the jet stream is looking Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. The stronger this ridge, the more likely we'll see a cutoff low and a low chance of precipitation extending across the United States.
Thanks, Matt. Well, the trade is waiting on planting intentions that will be out at the end of the month. But what were the biggest surprises in USDA's March WASDE report? Mike North and Mark Gold join me next. Welcome back. Well, Mark Gold and Mike North joining us for our marketing roundtables. Let's dive right into the latest WASDE report from USDA. Mike, USDA cutting Brazil's soybean production numbers by 1 million metric tons. That was less than expected. Didn't do anything to Brazil's corn estimate there. It seems like that's the most controversial thing out of this latest report.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, as you look at this particular report, those were the only numbers that people were really watching. So for them to not make a change, I think kind of upset the apple cart in terms of expectation, but likely more to come. Boots on the ground suggest we've probably got at least another 4 to 5 million metric tons to come out of this. And I think the question the market's still trying to answer is, what extra growth do we maybe have to add to Argentina? And then how do we balance an Argentine crop that's twice the size of last year against, you know, a less than record crop coming out of Brazil?
StoneX, though, Mark, recently did a survey down in South America, and they actually raised the estimate for Brazil. When you look at that, that's a bit of deja vu from the U.S. this fall. It is amazing to see the production numbers coming out of South America, despite how brutal that drought was early on, Mark.
You know, it's the old story with these grains now. They just wait. They have the genetics. They just wait for the rains. While they're waiting, the crops look terrible. When they get 2 inches of rain, all of a sudden, they've got a pretty good crop. And they've had decent rain since then. So there's no reason to think that they're not going to wind up with a pretty good crop. Is it 155 or 156? I don't think so. I think we're much closer to 150 than anything else. But we'll see where we go. I don't know that that's going to be the big feature moving forward for the next month or two, but it's on the table.
Not a lot of changes when it comes to U.S. ending stocks, except for wheat. But when you look at the global ending stocks, we did see slight revisions there. But Mike, we've been talking about it. To see how much Ukraine is exporting, I mean, that is really changing things on the global ending stock side.
Yeah, and so that becomes the 1-2 punch. Now you add in, you know, these extra bushels coming out of South America as they've gotten the good weather that Mark alluded to a moment ago. And you walk into another U.S. growing season, and balance sheets globally look really, really full. And that ultimately sets the stage for the slower market that we've been in, and really kind of justifies market action over these last couple months as we've really kind of put to bed the South American story. But to your point, you add that extra layer of additional Ukrainian volume, and then you talk about, you know, 5 million metric tons more coming out of Russia on the wheat front over the course of this next marketing year. And there's going to be ample supplies of grain available in the world market.
Yeah, and then, Mark, we saw when it comes to U.S. ending stocks, lowering the wheat estimate based on poor exports. But also this week, USDA reporting that SRW sales cancellation from China of 110,000 metric tons during the 2023-2024 marketing year. I mean, wheat getting hit with a couple negative news items this week, Mark.
You know, isn't it interesting that we had 2 cancellations, one yesterday, one today, but the wheat market, as we sit right now, is looking at a key reversal. They made a contract low overnight. We're over the previous day's high. If we can close up over 38.5, it's a key reversal. So this market has rejected bad news, hopefully, and we'll see these higher closes. And, you know, I believe the markets may have certainly seen the bottoms in here. And now if we can just get the funds to pull the trigger and cover some of these massive short positions, which they started to last week in the corn, they covered about 50,000 corn, but there's a lot more yet to come, and that could lead us to some higher prices.
All right, what could bring the funds out of their short position? We're going to ask Mike North that next. Welcome back. All right, Mike, Mark mentioned it before the break, but the funds are still holding a short position. What brings them out of that?
Well, I think in today's day and age, you have to leave room for any geopolitical event, any surprise that would, fall out of the sky seemingly to shake markets up a little bit and get them excited. It could very well be, some of this strong job growth that we continue to show and some of the ultimate strength in the economy, which, raises this inflation story some more and maybe starts bringing them back into the mix to use commodities as an inflation play. But I think the one everybody's hoping on is weather. And certainly as you look at a drought map, we remain dry here in the United States. But I think there's going to be some patience around that story, given the way that the crop performed last year following a very hot and dry June. And so it's an unknown factor right now, but it's going to take something large. It's going to take something unknown, or it's going to take something like weather, which is already on our radar, to develop further and become a real threat.
Mark?
If I could just add
Yep.
to that.
Yep, go ahead.
There's several ways to rally a market. Supply is one, demand is the other, and the other is the fund moving money around. Now, yesterday, for the first time, we saw a big option buying in the corn calls. We haven't seen that kind of buying in a long time. We've got some concerns about inflation. We've got the dollar moving lower because of the high numbers that we're seeing in terms of our debt out here. So the question is, the third thing that can move these markets is the funds covering their short positions out here. So I think, from what we saw with the call options, we've tried to make some new lows on the charts out here, and we've seen some fun buying. If we can get it to continue with good closes here on Friday, I think it's going to be a matter of the funds are just going to start to cover this stuff. At least I hope so.
Well, speaking of demand, China did announce this week that it's going to start stockpiling grains and edible oils this year, increase support and policies to boost agricultural production, aiming to improve food security. Bottom line, Mike, what does that mean for us?
Well, that's the headline, but at the same time, markets have moved back to 3 and 4 year lows. So again, I look at this more as a market play, and I tend to agree with Mark. Temporarily, we've likely found some bottoms in here, and I believe they're going to be active. If you look at globally how they came into the overall grain marketplace in the last couple of weeks, they've been very active, and I think it's more a matter of price than it is anything to do with some sort of plan that they have across the top of the organization. They're buying in opportune markets, and I think they're going to continue to move down that path. As you look at what's going on in their pork market right now, as you watch their economy, there was a couple of good numbers that came out yesterday, but overall the economy looks very sick, which generally means less protein consumption.
Mark, real quick, light cash cattle traded this week, hitting 185. That was up from a week ago, a high for this year too.
Yeah, we even saw 186 in Texas and in Kansas. So what we're seeing is the futures markets, we've had these discrepancies between the futures and the cash market. The box beef has acted very strong here. And now we're seeing that the cattle buyer is kind of, looking to buy cattle that aren't out there. Certainly the fires in the West had something to do with it. We're backing off here a bit today, but overall this market has looked pretty good.
All right, Mike, Mark, thank you so much. We need to take a quick break and then we'll be back with much more.
Hey folks, welcome back to Tractor Tales, and join me this week as we're off to Adrian, North Dakota to check out Lee Miller's 1955 John Deere 70.
The 70 was built to take the place of the G, and they kind of used the same transmission and stuff, except that the 70 was built with a duplex carburation system, which made it a lot smoother operating engine than the G. I always wanted a 70, so I contacted the owner, and he was a retired farmer, and he had bought this tractor new in Wimbledon, North Dakota from the John Deere dealer, so it was a one-owner tractor. It was in really nice shape. John Deere was in the process of transforming from the round wide front to the square wide front, so not a lot of 70s had the square front end on them, but it's a good feature. During the hot weather, people like to get in the shade, so they put umbrellas on them to try to get out of the hot sun. save their skin. In years past, I have plowed with it, but generally I just use it for tractor drives now. I was lucky to find an original owner tractor that, you know, hadn't been passed down through a lot of different hands. And when you're talking about a tractor that's 65 years old and be the second owner, that's pretty unique.
The winter that wasn't. That describes what it was like this winter in the Northern Plains. So how are North Dakota farmers preparing for planting now, considering the moisture deficit they may be in this year? That's our Farm Journal report after the break.
You're watching U.S. Farm Report. Trusted, timely, tradition. U.S. Farm Report at Ag Industry Day is brought to you by the Mosaic Company, creating innovative advanced crop nutrition products and practices.
Well, at this time last year, farmers in the Northern Plains had several feet of snow in their backyard, causing concerns about planting delays and a possible switch to more soybean acres. However, that is not the case this year, as Michelle Roque found out in Grand Forks, North Dakota this week at this year's CHS Ag Industry Day.
Yeah, well, what a difference a year makes. As you can see behind me, there's very little snow on the ground here in Grand Forks, as we've had a relatively open and warm winter in the Dakotas and Minnesota. And while that could mean an early start to the planting season, it's also raising concerns among the producers that we talked to about drought.
Preparations are already underway for the planting season at the Grotty Farm in the Red River Valley of North Dakota. And with the lack of snowfall, planting could come early.
If we don't get any more snow and with the warmer temperatures, it could be in April. I think corn could be earlier than normal. Beets, for sure, would be earlier than normal.
And that's true for other parts of the state.
There was guys putting fertilizer down in southeast North Dakota here a week ago when that warm spell came. So it does look like right now this could be one of the first years in many years that we could be in the field in April.
But does the forecast support an early spring planting season in the Northern Plains? The director of NDON shared his outlook with farmers at the CHS Ag Industry Day.
If we got a weird rain system or even a little snow in the middle of April, which isn't unusual for us, you know, that would set people back a little bit. But the positive, because we're not starting with anything we would get would probably either melt or evaporate pretty quickly. So the odds favor most areas getting in much earlier than last year.
If that holds true, there will be a mad rush for inputs like fertilizer. A lot of product was applied last fall, which helps, but retailers say it will be tight.
We certainly have a potential for a challenge going forward. I think our system will be full as we start the spring, and we had a really good fall with a lot of tons on the ground, but still getting those resupply tons definitely can be impacted.
The potash, we don't foresee any supplies. The biggest challenge will be the logistics, and getting it up the river. And so on the phosphate side, on the other hand, we do anticipate it will be tight through spring.
With the open and warm winter, there are also some farmers worried about drought in 2024.
We got less moisture throughout the winter than average, and we went into the winter pretty dry as well. The subsoil moisture is really low right now. We haven't had enough moisture in the last couple of years to build that up.
Winters like this remind them of 2012, 1988, 1976. So yeah, they are a little bit concerned about drought.
But is it a valid concern this early in the season?
Winters are supposed to be dry, and so at the moment there's no concern. I'm forecasting it to turn dry, so I understand there probably will be concern, don't get me wrong, but as of right now, most areas really aren't doing all that bad.
And of course, all this plus grain prices are playing into farmers' planting decisions in the region. For the Grotties, they've taken wheat out of their rotation, added corn, soybeans, and edible beans.
We got into edible beans a few years back, and it's just good to have a variety of crops, and especially with the way commodity prices are headed, it's not good to have everything in one category.
Martinson says many of the farmers he works with are looking at acreage shifts.
I think we're going to see more beans in the whole state, less sunflowers, more canola, more dry edible beans, less barley, and I think wheat's going to suffer. I mean, a lot of guys are pulling wheat out of their rotations because of the poor performance the market's having.
Meanwhile, Allison Thompson is working with many producers in North Dakota and Minnesota that are leaning towards more corn, but at the expense of beans.
In the last couple of years, we've had really good yields, surprisingly good yields for a lot of guys. So it's not surprising that they're leaning towards corn at this point versus soybeans. I think a lot of people up here in this neck of the woods definitely feel like we're kind of topped out on soybeans as far as yields and what they're capable of doing.
And acreage shifts are most likely to come in the fringe areas, which is generally the northern plains. But according to Dwayne Bussey, weather could still change some decisions.
If we have an early spring, farmers like to plant corn, and that ends up being that 1 extra quarter of corn. Well, that 1 extra quarter of corn could mean no shift at all. And really, corn can't handle that. It needs to give up some acres. That would be a very tight situation for soybeans. So to me, soybeans have to buy some acres here moving forward.
So as we always say, Mother Nature will have the final say. I'm Michelle Rook reporting for U.S. Farm Report.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, we talked about it last weekend on the show from Commodity Classic, but China said this week they are stockpiling their reserves, buying quite a bit of grain. We'll talk about it in Ag Around the World next. Now for a glimpse of Ag Around the World. Thousands of delegates gathered in Beijing for China's most important political event, the annual meeting of China's National People's Congress. The economy is at the top of the agenda, with China's leaders announcing an ambitious 5% growth target for this year. Mark Stewart has that story.
Speaking inside the Great Hall of the People, Premier Li Qiang telling some 3,000 delegates from across the country China hopes to see a growth rate this year of around 5%. This despite some strong economic barriers, including a crisis with the property sector and falling prices on everyday items used by families. The stock market has also seen hefty declines.
Achieving this year's targets will not be easy. So we need to maintain policy focus, work harder, and mobilize the concerted efforts of all sides.
And then there's the military spending, another increase of 7.2%, same as last year. An investment at a time when U.S.-China relations are still fraught, while geopolitical tensions remain high across the Taiwan Strait and in the South China Sea. While the premier was doing the talking, make no mistake, this is Xi Jinping's China. The news conference with the premier after the Congress, a tradition for the past 3 decades, now canceled. It is the latest reminder in this nation of 1.4 billion people, Xi is the one calling the shots. And as many analysts have pointed out, he'll have a hard time blaming others when things go wrong.
Beijing announcing steps to improve agriculture and food security through building up its own reserves. The Chinese government announcing it will spend $19.5 billion on stockpiling grains, edible oils, and other materials this year. This is up 8.1% from a year ago. Arlen Suderman with StoneX confirms they're building reserves, as we first reported on the show last week, even though they had big crops, including corn, and their prices are depressed.
Why are they doing that? But they're building up reserves of basically all of their essential commodities, be it crude oil, be it corn, be it soybeans or whatever. They're building up those reserves. So that's fitting them right now with their objective, like they're preparing for something, I don't know.
In a continuing effort to beef up its homegrown ag industry, Chinese scientists have apparently developed a higher yielding wheat. According to a research paper published in Plant Biotechnology Journal, the wheat would be used for bread production, scientists using CRISPR genome editing to boost the length and weight of wheat. WorldGrain.com reporting the team of researchers also found a way to control grain length. China is the #1 producer in the world of wheat. The country's grain harvest hit a record high last year. Well, here at home are some legislators walking away from the Farm Bill. That's Chip's Corner next.
Chip's Corner on U.S. Farm Report is brought to you by Grounded. Spray smarter and improve herbicide performance with Grounded, a multifunctional adjuvant from Helena.
Welcome back. Well, Chip's Corner this week. Chip, I know you have a lot of good stuff that you covered. But one thing that the latest Ag Economist Monthly Monitor survey revealed, that's a survey between Farm Journal and the University of Missouri, is that ag economists say lower commodity prices could push Congress to have to do something with the Farm Bill. But Chip, right now, it does not seem like that's the case.
And that's the Title I of the Farm Bill, where, of course, the safety net provisions are loaded. But the frustrating part about this time is we had Senator Moran from Kansas on the show earlier this week, and he showed such frustration over the leadership in the Senate because now that Chairwoman Stabenow has what she wants on conservation, now that she has what she wants on the nutrition title, according to Moran, she's kind of walking away from this.
I predicted, and maybe on your program months ago, that with Senator Stabenow, a person of good faith and good work and a personality, a desire to get things done, along with John Bozeman, the ranking Republican, that we ought to be able to get Farm Bill progress. And at a meeting at the White House, the chairwoman said, we're done. And again, maybe we would never come up with a farm bill, but I've never known a Congress to just quit working. And that is a sign of the times that we can't tolerate.
I've never seen a Congress to just quit working, and especially on a farm bill time. That's the level of dysfunction that we've got happening in Washington, D.C. right now. It's very frustrating to Stabenow on one side because she knows that the funding is not there for a major overhaul to the Title I, the commodity safety net. And as long as she's got what she wants on conservation and on the nutrition title, she's taken on kind of a let's do no harm attitude and not lose any of the funding that's available.
At Commodity Classic last week, I talked to a couple well-known policy experts, and I said, have you ever seen it this bad in Washington? And they said no. And the frustration's really on the staffer side, Chip, because, the analogy is they're like running on a hamster wheel. They are working hard to try behind the scenes to try to get this done, to try to get a farm bill done, but they are getting nowhere.
Yeah. And every time they make progress, they feel like they are, on the staffer side, every time they make that progress, they feel like they're at least another step closer, and then the end zone changes.
Well, to end on a happier note as well, you have a big anniversary coming up Monday, 10 years of AgriTalk PM. It seems like it was just yesterday that you started that show, Chip.
Hard to believe that 10 years ago, Market Rally came on the scene, and we're celebrating 10 years with the same guest that we had on the very first Market Rally. Arlen Suderman will be our guest analyst. So we'll do a little bit of celebrating on Monday.
Make sure to tune in 2 p.m. Chip, thanks so much.
You bet, Ty.
All right, well, one of the greatest female athletes of all time. We're traveling the countryside with Andrew McCrae next. Well, March Madness is about to ensue, and Iowa's own Caitlin Clark just set a scoring record at the University of Iowa, scoring more points in a college basketball career than any other man or woman. Andrew McCrae was recently in Houston, Texas for Commodity Classic, and he took a trip to nearby Beaumont, where you can find the museum for a woman who was perhaps the greatest female athlete of all times. She was talented in the game of basketball and much more. Although nearly a century has passed, her accomplishments still astound visitors today.
In Beaumont, Texas, you'll find a memorial and museum to a lady with roots in the area.
Babe was born in Port Arthur, Texas, and moved here after a hurricane, and her parents were part of the working class, and they were Norwegian immigrants.
She was born Mildred Diedrichsen, but as Sadie Atha explains, we know her as Babe because of a local athletic achievement early in her life.
She scored 5 home runs in 1 inning in her neighborhood baseball team, and so they compared her to Babe Ruth, and so that's how she got the name Babe.
Babe's athletic ability was evident from an early age. One of the neighbors even trimmed the Diedrichsens' hedges so Babe could practice jumping them for the hurdles. In 1932, she competed in the AAU Track and Field Championships and won the event as a one-woman team, beating highly regarded teams of over 20 ladies from the nation's top universities. Later that year, she set her eyes on the Olympic Games.
In her pre-trials, she competed and qualified for 5 events, but at the time, women were only allowed to compete in 3 events.
At the Olympics, she won the javelin throw, setting a world record, got gold in the 80-meter hurdles, and also earned silver in the high jump, when the judges broke a tie on technique. Those medals are on display at the museum here. But Babe was talented in many sports and soon began focusing on the game of golf, where she perhaps made her biggest impact.
She won 82 tournaments in her whole lifetime and even consecutively had 17 winning titles and was the first American to win one of the British tournaments. So she really made a name for herself, and that really goes into why she's the world's greatest female athlete.
She was a founding member of the LPGA, opening the doors for women to compete in the game of golf. And it was the game of golf that led her to marriage when she was partnered with wrestler George Zaharis. They were married in 1938. In 1953, at the age of 42, Babe Didrikson was diagnosed with cancer. She died 3 years later. Her life was but 45 years, but her accomplishments across so many sports earned her the title of Female Athlete of the Century by the Associated Press. Her life still speaks to us today.
She has a legacy, but she worked hard to inspire and to encourage people that if you put your mind to it, you can absolutely accomplish it. It does take discipline, determination, and I really hope people take away that sense of achievement with them.
While the trophies in these cases were awarded decades ago, Babe's accomplishments live on, an inspiration to athletes across the globe of what hard work and determination can do. Traveling the countryside in Beaumont, Texas, I'm Andrew McCrae.
Thanks, Andrew. His travels have taken him to several places over the years, sharing unique stories from throughout the countryside. You can watch more of those stories on the Farm Journal YouTube page. Just subscribe to see the latest. All right, up next, we're heading back to Texas. The heartbreak in the Texas Panhandle continues, but there are also signs of hope. That's next. Farmers and ranchers in the Texas Panhandle are working right now to assess the damage and add up the losses from the recent wildfire. The Texas Farm Bureau caught up with two ranchers who battled and survived Texas's largest wildfire last week.
2006, yeah, we've experienced that, unfortunately, and we've experienced 2017, 2018. This smokehouse fire, I would say, was very similar to 2006. Very similar. The way it moved, the speed, the destruction.
The day prior to this one, we were fighting a fire at Jeff's. Burned part of our ranch there and fought that into the night. Got up the next morning and it just progressively kept working this way. And Jeff and I were in communication. He said that it's probably about time, what he's hearing on the radio, that, you know, get cattle congregated to fend off the fire. And we made the decision to stay here. We'd gotten the cattle to the wheat field here behind the house and here around the headquarters. Bill, Jeff's son, said, "Hey guys, I think this is the best spot we're gonna defend." And we had a tractor with a disc on it, and I ran the disc around here, and as you can see, kind of tore off the ground. But to save the headquarters, I make the joke that we're all in the ranching business and sometimes give a hard time to farmers, but farming saved our lives here. The disc and the wheat field, I don't think these headquarters would be here.
We're moving the cows to some other leased grass we've had that didn't burn, so we're just getting them off this black. We're still a little bit worried because we're maybe not even, that place isn't even out of the fire danger, but you know, it's better for the stock if we can get them off this burn, get them out of the smoke, get them out of this dust, let those cows calve on some good ground. We've probably lost about 25 to 30% of the ranch of LaFours, the north end. This entire ranch burned. Those were John grew up here. It's all the grass is burned here.
Yeah, 100%. We're 20 calves, to my count right now, short here, 5 to 10 grown stock. Bulls fared okay. One of our biggest losses here was our saddle horses. We have some here at the headquarters that we were able to get pulled together, but we have another pasture that we rest some saddle horses. I'm waiting on the vet to get out here to help me assess that, but that doesn't look very good.
Wow, just so emotional. And again, thank you to Texas Farm Bureau. Well, in the most desperate times is when agriculture shines. And from the ashes rose hope as fellow farmers answered the call from those in need. Pictures and videos continue to pour in as deliveries of hay and hope make their way to the Texas Panhandle. One of those helping orchestrate those donations, Braden McInnes, who lives in Anderson County, Texas, which is East Texas.
There was a lot of hay around, and I had several loads in inventory still. And anyway, so we knew we could make it happen. Had the trucks, had the drive.
He says he learned about the desperate calls for hay during Commodity Classic last week, and he immediately knew they needed to answer the call for help.
We actually left the Commodity Classic probably A day early, so we get home, we get trucks ready to go.
By 3 a.m. the next morning, he was on the road, ready to make the 500-mile trip one way to the Texas Panhandle. And he wasn't alone.
The ag world, I don't care if it's North Dakota or Texas, ag world is super small. And, news travels really fast. It didn't take long for all the local guys that were able to do something, actually started to do something.
McKenna says farmers across their entire county, along with the Anderson County Farm Bureau, have rallied together to send a steady flow of hay to ranchers in need.
I think we're probably somewhere around 8 or 9. I know there's been lots of loads of cubes and fencing supplies too.
Each trailer of hay loaded with 42 to 45 round bales. And if you want to help, 3 livestock supply points have been set up across the Panhandle for donations. There's an east, north, and west location. The east location is in Pampa. As you can see, the north location is in Canadian, and the west location is set up in Borger. We've outlined all those locations and the contact information to each on your screen. You can also find out more on agweb.com. All right, that does it for U.S. Farm Report this weekend. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to join us again next weekend right here in the studio as we work to build on our tradition. Have a great weekend, everyone.
U.S. Farm Report is produced and distributed by Farm Journal Broadcast.